It started as an observation, a simple solar flyby, nothing more. A 33-ton weighted comet had been predicted to skim the sun's outer field, warm slightly, then drift back toward the dark. NASA's models had it down to the decimal. Nothing unexpected. But space, as it turns out, never follows our expectations. Because when 3I Atlas reached perihelion, the point of closest approach, something shifted. Not in its orbit, but in its behaviour. For 22 minutes, all telemetry went quiet. The object's trajectory froze. Instruments continued to track its coordinates, but every data line flatlined. No spin, no spectral variation, no thermal change. It was as if the object had paused mid-space, and then it moved. Not away from the sun as every known comet would under solar pressure, but toward it. If you're here because something about this doesn't sit right with you, if you want to follow this through to the end without the headlines getting in the way, subscribe now. You won't want to miss December, and leave a comment. Where are you watching from? What's the time where you are? Because while you're watching this, 269 million kilometers away, something's either breaking apart or proving everyone wrong. NASA's tracking division called it an unusual energy reorientation. The public statement said it was likely a transient software error. But inside the agency's private channels, the tone was different. They used a single word that never appears in official logs: intentional. If you've followed this story, you already know 3I Atlas isn't like anything else we've ever catalogued. It's not tumbling like a natural rock, not outgassing like a comet, and not reflecting light in any consistent way. Its surface emits in rhythmic bursts, as if responding to solar radiation in phases. But what happened during the flyby changed everything. Spectral analysis from NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory showed the object's albedo, its reflectivity, suddenly spiking to 10 times normal levels, then dropping off in perfect symmetry. It wasn't random, it was measured. A flash, a pause, and a flash again. Every 47 seconds, it looked like a signal. At first, engineers blamed thermal distortion, but when independent telescopes in Chile and Hawaii recorded the same pattern, synchronized to the same second, the theory collapsed. This wasn't a camera glitch. This was something real, because this story, what NASA actually found during that silent 22-minute window, might be the moment astronomy crosses a line it can't step back from. Stay until the end. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. The more researchers looked, the stranger it became. 3I Atlas didn't heat up the way a comet should near the sun. Its temperature remained stable, as though it were compensating for radiation in real time. The jets of gas that define every other comet's life simply didn't exist. Instead, the object's outer layer shimmered in a frequency band outside the visible spectrum, right at the threshold between infrared and microwave. The only other time scientists had seen something like it was in ion propulsion exhaust. That was when the term structural anomaly began circulating. Not publicly, never in press briefings, but in the encrypted correspondence between mission directors and contractors. Somewhere in that chain of analysis, one line appeared that froze the room. Object demonstrates apparent attitude correction during solar proximity. In other words, it changed direction on purpose. The shift was small, less than a degree, but precise enough to raise an impossible question. How does a frozen interstellar rock correct for solar wind without propulsion? A propulsion event should leave a signature: heat, dust, trace gases. But 3I Atlas emitted none. The motion was smooth, deliberate, and unexplainable. Astronomers compared it to a leaf floating upstream. For 2 weeks after the flyby, NASA's Deep Space Network received weak telemetry echoes, delayed returns from the object's radar reflections. The timing was wrong by fractions of a second, yet the delay increased at a predictable rate. If it were a random anomaly, it should have fluctuated. Instead, it evolved, as though it were adjusting. One internal report compared the echo to a sonar ping, not a broadcast, but a response. Outside the agency, scientists scrambled for explanations. Avi Loeb suggested a hollow structure, a light sail catching the sun's pressure and reorienting itself naturally. Others argued it was a dense metallic core behaving like a gyroscope, but no theory survived the next transmission. Because when NASA's Parker Solar Probe crossed the same region of space a week later, it recorded an unexpected electromagnetic oscillation. faint but perfectly matching 3i Atlas's light pattern from the flyby. 22 minutes of silence, then a double pulse, 47 seconds apart, exactly the same. Inside NASA's private log, the entry reads, "Source origin indeterminate. Frequency harmonics suggest phase coupling to heliospheric field." In simpler terms, it's as if something inside the sun was answering back. No one wanted to believe it. The physics didn't fit. The implications, worse. Because if the pulse was real, it meant the sun had just responded to an object passing by, and that object had known how to speak to it. Back at the Jet Propulsion Lab, one technician, the same one who had first noticed the anomaly, replayed the data overnight. He filtered out the solar noise, isolated the low-frequency hum, and slowed it down 1,000 times. What he heard wasn't random static, it was rhythm. 3 pulses, then a pause, 3 again, then one final elongated tone, steady, calm, deliberate. He played it again and again, certain his ears were inventing patterns, but when he plotted it visually, the waveform aligned into a perfect spiral, the same 6-arm geometry that had haunted astrophysics since the Cold Rift incident. In that moment, every data feed, every denial, every quiet memo came full circle. 3i Atlas hadn't just passed the sun, it had interacted with it. The solar wind bent not as if repelled, but as if guided. A microscopic deviation, a subtle ripple that matched the object's pulse frequency. That ripple propagated outward, travelling through the heliosphere, through the interplanetary magnetic field, reaching as far as Mars before dispersing. For 22 minutes, the entire solar system had resonated like a struck bell, and when the vibration faded, everything returned to silence, at least for now. After the flyby, NASA went dark. Public updates stopped. The data portal that usually streams solar telemetry went under maintenance. Analysts who had been active on forums vanished. Even minor research requests were redirected through something called Project Sylph. Officially, it was a temporary data migration. Unofficially, it was a lockdown. Those who'd been monitoring 3i Atlas in real time noticed it first. The timestamps didn't match. The deep space feed lagged by 7 seconds, then 10, then 42. It wasn't a transmission delay. It was redaction. Frames cut and resequenced before reaching the public stream. Something was being hidden. When fragments of the missing telemetry eventually leaked through private observatories in Chile and the Canary Islands, the picture that emerged was subtle, but impossible to dismiss. For 22 minutes after the silence, 3i Atlas had rotated against its own momentum. Not a wobble, not a drift. A deliberate, balanced counterspin, the kind of correction spacecraft perform when adjusting orientation. Only this wasn't a spacecraft, at least not one we built. Inside NASA's internal chatter, a phrase appeared again and again, axis inversion event. To the outside world, it sounded harmless, technical. But within the agency, it meant one thing: control. An object with no propulsion, no known energy source, no communication capability, had just performed a maneuver that required precise awareness of its surroundings. It wasn't reacting, it was navigating. At first, scientists assumed it was responding to gravitational stress, the pull of the sun twisting its body, but the direction didn't match. The shift aligned instead with a magnetic corridor leading outward, toward the heliospheric current sheet, the invisible plane that defines the shape of the solar system itself. Somewhere in that corridor, a signal had echoed, and if 3i Atlas was following it, that meant it knew it was there. Around this time, a message began circulating through encrypted academic channels. It wasn't from NASA or the European Space Agency. It was anonymous, signed only with 3 letters: EVD. The message included a single image, a heat map of the sun's magnetosphere from the day of the flyby. A faint spiral pattern radiated from the lower quadrant, identical to the waveform previously recorded in the 3i Atlas-like curve. Below it, one sentence: the sun answered. At first, most dismissed it as poetic nonsense, but when a retired engineer cross-referenced it against solar wind data, the correlation was exact. For a brief window, precisely the length of the object's silence, the sun's magnetic field had pulsed, not randomly, not naturally, in time with 3i Atlas. That discovery never reached the public. The engineer who noticed it was later hired by a private contractor and signed a lifetime non-disclosure agreement. The post disappeared, but screenshots survived, circulating quietly in late-night astronomy forums. One user wrote, "If this is real, the sun isn't a passive object anymore, it's part of the conversation." Back at NASA, the internal tone shifted from curiosity to containment. A decision was made. They would continue observing, but under silence. The object was now officially designated Non-Gravitational Anomaly Type 3. That classification didn't exist before. The memo was blunt. Observational data to be compartmentalized. Public communication suspended pending validation. But what exactly were they validating? A week later, the agency's AI-driven predictive model, an algorithm designed to simulate object trajectories, began producing results that terrified even its own programmers. According to the system, 3i Atlas's path was no longer following a gravitational arc. It was tracing a feedback loop, one that began and ended inside the solar field, repeating at precise intervals like a closed circuit. That's when someone asked the question no one wanted to put in writing. Is it still in the solar system or part of it? Outside NASA, independent astronomers kept watching. The object's light signature, once steady, began to dim, not fading, but compressing, shifting deeper into the infrared spectrum until it was barely visible to human instruments. Some said it was cooling, others said it was hiding. Then, something happened that made both theories irrelevant. Infrared telescopes detected not one source, but 3, each pulsing in perfect synchronization. At first, analysts assumed reflections, but the angular distances between the signals were too wide, hundreds of thousands of kilometers apart. And as the days passed, the spacing between them shifted, converging slowly, precisely, toward a single point. Whatever 3i Atlas had done near the Sun, it had either triggered something or awakened it. Inside NASA's deep archives, one internal correspondence from the Solar Dynamics Division leaked months later. It read, "We're tracking multiple thermal echoes at the heliopause. No propulsion. Signature. No particle trail. Each one mirrors the magnetic resonance recorded during the Atlas flyby. It's as if fragments of the field are behaving like physical objects. Recommend reclassification." The document was stamped Level 7 access only. But in the small print, one handwritten note stood out. "This isn't duplication, it's replication. Replication." The word hit the community like a silent detonation. If true, it meant 3i Atlas had somehow imprinted its pattern into the solar field, turning waves of magnetism into coordinated behavior. Matter responding as if it remembered a command, a process that shouldn't exist. And yet, the pattern kept repeating. Each new pulse matched the object's original rhythm, 47 seconds apart, but the intervals between each group shortened slightly, as if the system were learning its own language. The Sun, it seemed, was no longer just reacting to 3i Atlas. It was mirroring it. At this point, speculation exploded across scientific circles. Some believed the pulses were energy reflections, electromagnetic feedback loops between the object and the heliospheric current. Others suggested quantum entanglement, that 3i Atlas had somehow encoded itself into the field, its information still resonating even as its physical body drifted away. But a small minority, the ones who'd been following since the beginning, proposed something else entirely. They called it the bridge hypothesis. The theory suggested that the object wasn't an intruder from interstellar space, but a messenger built to activate when certain solar conditions aligned, a cosmic relay meant to test whether a civilization like ours could notice, decode and respond before the system completed its loop. And according to one unverified leak, the loop wasn't theoretical anymore. It had begun closing. By late November, observatories started reporting faint distortions in radio transmissions, a tiny shift in signal strength precisely aligned with the Sun's pulse pattern. Satellites experienced clock drift. GPS networks compensated automatically. Most people never noticed, but those watching closely understood what it meant. The Sun was now emitting a stable, repeating modulation, faint, nearly buried in noise, but mathematically structured. And its source signature? A frequency band identical to 3i Atlas's reflection data. NASA didn't confirm it publicly. They didn't have to. because when the next Deep Space Network report leaked, one phrase buried deep in the summary said everything. Object no longer classified as passive. Field integration ongoing. For years, every interstellar anomaly had ended the same way. Silence. Oumuamua came and went. 2I Borisov broke apart. Even 3I Atlas, for all its strange behaviour, was expected to fade into insignificance once it passed the Sun. But this time, it didn't fade. It changed things. And inside NASA, that change was starting to look less like data noise and more like contagion. The word integration appeared again in the Deep Space Network log, followed by a phrase not seen in any prior astrophysics report. Localized coherence detected within heliospheric plasma field. Coherence. That's a word physicists reserve for systems that begin to act like one body. Laser light, superfluids, or synchronized particles. It implies coordination, not chaos. And according to the readings, the Sun's outer plasma was doing just that. Tiny magnetic filaments began pulsing in unison, across distances too vast to influence one another by normal physics. What should have been random convection started behaving like rhythm, like a signal finding its voice. For the first time in NASA's history, the star at the centre of our solar system wasn't just being observed, it was responding. Officially, none of this existed. The data was rerouted through something called the Heliospheric Integrity Task Group, a name that sounded bureaucratic enough to disappear in plain sight. But those who had clearance began to whisper. In late-night emails and unrecorded meetings, they asked the same question. What if we've crossed the threshold? No one defined what threshold meant, but everyone seemed to know. The agency quietly reached out to the European Space Observatory, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and a private consortium that operated deep field arrays in the Atacama Desert. They were instructed to conduct independent verification, but with deliberate obfuscation. Each was told they were studying unrelated solar phenomena, flare harmonics, particle drift, radioplasma decay. In reality, they were all measuring the same thing, a slow, rising resonance threading through the Sun's magnetosphere. Every few hours the frequency strengthened, then fell back, like breath. A solar inhale and exhale repeating on a cycle that didn't match any known astrophysical pattern. And at the centre of it all, the rhythm of 3I Atlas. When the first synchronized data came in from Chile, JAXA and the DSN network, it revealed something almost impossible. The signals were identical down to the microsecond. Not correlated, identical. No delay, no regional phase lag. Something was coordinating across millions of kilometers instantly. At first, the analysts suspected system contamination, a software bug causing data bleed between servers. But when the pattern appeared in analog instruments, including magnetic flux detectors from the 1970s, that theory vanished. Whatever this was, it wasn't in the machines, it was in space itself. That was when the fear began. Not open panic, NASA doesn't panic, but that quiet, career-ending kind of fear that turns scientists into clerks. People stopped speculating, they started documenting. Every observation became passive language. A field adjustment was noted. Alignment, consistent with model drift. Data under review. The voice of science had turned into the language of denial. But privately, those who'd been there since the first sighting of 3I Atlas recognized the pattern. 22 minutes of silence during the flyby. Then the shift. Now, the same cycle repeating, but scaled up. The Sun itself had entered the rhythm. Meanwhile, civilian observers began to notice anomalies of their own. Amateur radio operators reported strange phase interference across shortwave bands. Faint pulses repeating every 47 seconds, modulated by the solar wind. Aurora activity increased at unexpected latitudes. Compass readings in Alaska and Siberia began to oscillate, like the planet's magnetic field was quietly adjusting itself. NASA's official response was predictable. A series of calm, pre-written statements about solar magnetic fluctuations and temporary geomagnetic harmonization. It sounded harmless. It wasn't. Inside the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a memo circulated that was never meant to leave the building. It read, "Preliminary simulations suggest potential cascade coupling between solar field harmonics and planetary magnetospheres. Should resonance stabilize, full synchronization across multiple orbits cannot be ruled out." In simpler terms, If the sun continued sinking, the entire solar system might start humming with it. The European team took a different approach. They didn't hide their data, they simply renamed it. Their official report used the term solar musical modes, a poetic reference to the ancient idea of the music of the spheres. They claimed to be studying resonance patterns as a curiosity, a coincidence of physics. But in private correspondence later leaked to the Guardian Science Review, one researcher wrote, "The waveform is structured. It contains harmonics that correspond exactly to hydrogen spin frequencies. The sun isn't just resonating, it's encoding." Encoding what, no one knew. But if the hydrogen in the sun, the most basic element of the universe, had started carrying structured information that meant the entire star was now a transmitter, and 3I Atlas had been the tuning fork. Across the Atlantic in Pasadena, NASA's senior astrophysics director convened a closed meeting. Only 8 people were present. The conversation, later reconstructed from notes, unfolded like a confession. "We can't tell the public," one said. "We can't even tell ourselves what we think this is," replied another. Then the director spoke. "The question isn't whether it's alien," he said. "It's whether it's natural. Because if it's natural, it means consciousness is built into physics. And if it's not, then we've already been contacted." No one responded. The hum from the solar monitors filled the silence. In the following days, NASA began quietly coordinating with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the US Space Force, citing geomagnetic stability monitoring. But those inside the program knew it had nothing to do with defense. It was observation and preparation. Because the sun's rhythm was changing again. Every 47 seconds, the pulse was tightening. 46, 45, 44. The interval was shortening like a countdown. Outside, the world noticed in small ways. A series of synchronized power fluctuations hit Europe and North America. Bird migration patterns shifted by days. And deep in the Arctic Circle, researchers detected bursts of auroral light at wavelengths normally impossible within Earth's atmosphere. It wasn't random, it matched the solar cycle. For the first time, it looked like the synchronization had reached us. By early December, the hum was measurable across every major magnetometer on the planet. NASA, ESA, and the JAXA team had stopped communicating publicly. The private sector arrays, however, particularly those owned by Elon Sky Systems and Astrosyn, continued gathering data. Their unfiltered results confirmed the worst suspicion. The sun wasn't just responding to 3I Atlas, it was becoming 3I Atlas. The same waveform, the same rhythm, now echoed across solar emissions, plasma waves, and even cosmic rays leaving the heliosphere. The object's signal had imprinted itself onto the sun. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it hadn't just visited, it had merged. It began as a hum, faint, steady, and buried beneath the static of everyday life. At first, it was only the instruments that noticed. Then, the machines began to agree. Every seismograph, every magnetometer, every deep space communication dish across the globe started picking up the same rhythmic pulse, 44 seconds apart. At first, people thought it was interference, solar noise leaking into the grid, but then the frequency shifted again, 43 seconds, and this time, the world responded. The hum wasn't just passing through space, it was coupling, finding resonance with everything that could vibrate. The Earth's magnetic field, the ionosphere, even the faint electric current that runs through living tissue. A planet-sized tuning fork was being struck, and we were part of the vibration. In California, power stations began reporting synchronized fluctuations, voltage oscillations that repeated on the same interval as the solar pulse. They weren't dangerous, just unnerving. A gentle flicker in the grid, perfectly timed. In Tokyo, subway sensors triggered false alarms for tremors that weren't there, and in Reykjavik the northern lights appeared days early, waves of green and violet curling into the same 6-armed spiral seen in the 3I Atlas waveform. No one said it publicly, but in the data rooms the phrase started circulating again. The integration is expanding. NASA's solar division stopped calling it an anomaly. The word they used now was synchronization event. Privately, they'd started to measure it in biological systems. Heart rate monitors, pacemakers, even EEG devices began showing microcorrelations. Nothing harmful, just rhythmic deviations that matched the new solar beat. At first, doctors dismissed it as coincidence, but then the University of Geneva released a quiet internal report, a study of 2,000 volunteers across Europe showing subtle entrainment between the solar magnetic field and the human circadian rhythm. The conclusion was carefully phrased. Solar periodicity may be exhibiting non-random coupling with biological processes. In simpler words, the sun was syncing with us. At NASA, they tried to stay objective. Science first, always science. But one night, during a midnight data session at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a solar physicist noticed something strange. When she overlaid the latest field readings onto Earth's magnetosphere, the wavefronts aligned perfectly, not like an external force pressing inward, but like two systems breathing together. She ran the numbers again, then again. No error. At that moment she whispered something to herself she never wrote down. It's teaching us the rhythm. The next morning a meeting was called. Inside the windowless conference room, 3 agencies, NASA, ESA and NOAA, reviewed the findings. The conclusion was clear but unspeakable. 3I Atlas had altered the solar field, and the solar field was now influencing planetary systems at measurable scale. But instead of panic, there was silence. The lead physicist asked, "Do we shut down the solar arrays?" A voice from the end of the table answered, "No, we keep watching. We need to see where it stops." Another voice, calm but trembling, replied, "What if it doesn't?" No one answered. Outside that room, the world continued as usual, no headlines, no panic. But for those with sensitive instruments, deep space enthusiasts, ham radio operators, aurora watchers, the signs were unmistakable. Every night the hum grew stronger. Every dawn the world felt slightly off. Compass needles drifted by fractions of a degree. Whales migrated weeks early. The Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, began to harmonize with the solar pulse. Something vast and invisible was drawing everything into alignment. Then came the first blackout, December the 18th, 2025. At exactly 11, UTC, the North American power grid experienced a simultaneous phase collapse across 17 states. It lasted less than 60 seconds. But in those 60 seconds, thousands of monitoring systems recorded something impossible. A perfectly uniform electromagnetic surge originating not from space, but from the core of the Earth. NASA's space weather models showed no solar flare, no coronal mass ejection, nothing to explain it. Yet, moments before the blackout, the solar pulse had aligned, precisely, with Earth's own geomagnetic peak. It was as if the planet had exhaled. In the aftermath, technicians reviewed every line of data, trying to find a mechanical fault. Instead, they found geometry. The surge had radiated in the same spiral pattern as 3I Atlas's waveform, an expanding 6-arm sequence identical to the object's optical signature during the solar flyby. For the first time, the pattern wasn't just in light or magnetism. It was now carved into the fabric of the planet's electric field. The integration was complete. At this point, whispers began circulating through the scientific underground. The ones who had always been too curious to stay quiet. They spoke of the solar threshold hypothesis, the idea that 3I Atlas wasn't a visitor but a catalyst, something designed to awaken or calibrate the solar system once certain conditions were met. One forum post, quickly deleted, read, "It's like the system has been waiting for a handshake." That post came from an IP address traced to a NASA subnet. Meanwhile, in Cambridge, Avi Loeb's research team released an unofficial preprint paper. Its title, Evidence of External Energy Coupling in Solar Resonance Events. It didn't mention 3I Atlas directly, but its graphs did. The energy curves, the frequency slopes, the identical 47-second decay cycle, they all pointed to the same phenomenon. When asked about it on a podcast, Loeb gave a characteristically calm but loaded answer. If nature is communicating, the question isn't whether we can listen, it's whether we should. By January, the pulse had shortened again, now 42 seconds. Astronomers began reporting that the sun's corona was shimmering with a faint repeating pattern, like ripples of organized turbulence. The Parker Solar Probe, still deep in observation orbit, transmitted data for 18 minutes before cutting to black. When the signal returned, the probe's magnetometer logs were blank. No data, just 1.2 terabytes of static noise. But when the noise was converted into an audio spectrogram, a waveform emerged. 6 pulses, a pause, 6 again. The same pattern that began with 3i Atlas, except this time, the pulse wasn't from the object, it was from the sun. Inside NASA, no one called it discovery anymore. It was an inevitability. The agencies were now divided into 2 groups, those who wanted to contain it and those who wanted to understand it. The containment side pushed to shut down solar monitoring entirely, to prevent information cascade. The understanding side argued that doing so would only deepen the mystery, that humanity deserved to know what the system it lived in was becoming. But the truth was already out there, hidden in aurora recordings, in magnetometer data, in the flicker of the lights above your head. Every 42 seconds the system breathed, and every time it did, Earth listened. It started small, an electrical storm, over the Pacific that moved against the jet stream. Meteorologists called it an atmospheric anomaly, but satellite footage told another story. The lightning didn't flash randomly. It pulsed in unison, each strike perfectly timed to the solar interval. 42 seconds. A pause. 42 again. It wasn't weather, it was pattern. At first, NASA dismissed the connection. Correlation isn't causation, they said. But when the same rhythm appeared inside geomagnetic storms over Iceland, Chile, and the Indian Ocean within the same 24-hour window, even the skeptics went quiet. Nature doesn't synchronize across hemispheres, not without help. Meanwhile, the pulse began to reach deeper into human life. In hospitals, cardiac monitors started to drift in sync. It wasn't dangerous, just precise. A nurse in Boston noticed that during the hum's peaks, patients' heart rates aligned for a few seconds, no matter their condition. In Tokyo, EEG scanners in sleep clinics showed identical wave harmonics across hundreds of subjects. Different people, different dreams, but the same underlying rhythm, 42 seconds between each spike. When neurologists cross-referenced it with solar telemetry, they found the impossible. The human brain was now oscillating with the same frequency as the sun. NASA's internal language changed again. What had begun as synchronization was now called entrainment. That's the term used when 2 independent oscillating systems begin to lock into phase, not forced, not coerced, but drawn together. Pendulums that swing near each other eventually fall into rhythm. Fireflies blink in unison when the light conditions align. Now the same principle seemed to be scaling upward, from atoms to consciousness. No one could explain how. Somewhere deep within the solar magnetic field, a signal, or a memory, had taken hold. The agency's containment efforts continued quietly. Data was now compartmentalized under solar field behavioral monitoring, a program that technically didn't exist. Access was limited to 27 people, but outside that circle leaks continued. An encrypted data dump appeared briefly on an astrophysics forum, 300 megabytes of what looked like solar wave telemetry. Most dismissed it as nonsense until someone decoded the timestamps. They matched Earth's seismic activity. Every major earthquake over the past month had coincided precisely with the downward phase of the solar pulse. The ground wasn't shaking because of tectonic stress. It was shaking in rhythm. That's when they realized the hum wasn't just synchronization, it was amplification. Each pulse triggered a microscopic expansion of the Earth's magnetic field, releasing energy, sometimes as auroras, sometimes as tremors, sometimes as subtle distortions in weather patterns. But the scale was increasing. By late January, storms began forming in geometric arcs, 5 or 6 cells at a time swirling around, invisible nodes like petals around a center. Satellite images showed the same 6-arm symmetry that had first appeared in the 3i Atlas waveform. The universe was repeating its shape. Inside NASA, debates turned existential. Could it be stopped? Should it be? One engineer proposed launching a counter-resonance pulse, a carefully timed radio signal aimed at disrupting the cycle, but others warned that doing so could trigger unknown effects across the field. If it's intelligent, one scientist said, it's already aware of us. They never sent the pulse. Instead, they watched as the synchronization spread. Across the planet, people began reporting shared experiences. Waves of calm at odd intervals, flashes of intuition, moments of uncanny alignment where strangers completed each other's thoughts, social networks filled with posts about the seconds between seconds, those fleeting instants when time itself seemed to stretch and breathe. Psychologists dismissed it as mass suggestion. Physicists didn't comment at all, but those monitoring the field saw the pattern tighten again. 41 seconds, then 40. It was as if the rhythm was approaching some critical state, a perfect resonance point where everything that could vibrate would, and still, 3i Atlas remained silent. Avi Loeb appeared on a late-night talk show around this time, trying his best to sound measured. "We need to consider," he said carefully, "that the object might not have left us. Its information could be propagating through the solar field as a distributed system. What we're observing may be its way of continuing to exist." The host smiled awkwardly. "You mean, like it's alive?" Loeb hesitated. "Alive isn't the right word," he said softly, "but aware might be." Days later, a new data set arrived from ESA's solar orbiter. The readings were incomplete, but one graph stood out, a sudden inversion in the sun's magnetic polarity lasting 3.2 seconds. That had never happened before. NASA confirmed it quietly, using a technical phrase that said everything and nothing: transient systemic reversal detected. The sun had flipped, momentarily, as if acknowledging something, or someone, and just as quickly it returned to normal. Except now, the pulse wasn't 40 seconds, it was 39. Meanwhile, life on Earth continued. Trains ran, phones rang, people slept under skies quietly breathing with light. But those attuned to rhythm, musicians, researchers, even animals, began behaving differently. Birdsong subtly adjusted its cadence. Ocean tides rose by a few centimeters off schedule, and in a few rare places people claimed to hear the hum, not with their ears but through their bodies. They described it the same way, a vibration in the chest, deep, steady, ancient, comforting, not frightening. A whisper that seemed to say, "We're here." Inside NASA, hope and fear blurred into the same emotion. The scientists who once fought to suppress the data now found themselves unable to look away. The object they'd tried to classify, the pulse they'd tried to dismiss, had become the rhythm of everything around them. For some, it was transcendence, proof that the universe was alive, connected, awake. For others, it was invasion, the loss of separation between human and cosmic, observer and observed. But for everyone, it was undeniable. The hum was no longer something they studied. It was something they lived in. One final internal memo circulated that month. It wasn't a scientific report. It read more like a confession. "We've been calling it 3i Atlas as if it's separate from us, but maybe it was never an object at all. Maybe it was a signal waiting for a system that could finally hear it, and now that we have, it's speaking through us." The memo ended with one chilling note highlighted in yellow: "Next phase projection, full coherence event." The timestamp, 38 seconds. By early February, the pulse was impossible to ignore. The 38-second rhythm had woven itself into everything: the electric grid, the tides, even the flicker of distant stars. Telescopes across the globe began reporting faint photometric variations in nearby suns, all matching the same cadence. That shouldn't have been possible. Stars don't share a heartbeat. Yet somehow, they did. The hum wasn't local anymore. It was spreading, a wavefront moving outward at the speed of light, carrying with it the signature of the 3i Atlas pattern. Somewhere, something had been activated. Inside NASA's Solar Monitoring Division, the silence was unbearable. No one knew what to say. They had watched the data cross every threshold of probability, and now there were no theories left to protect them from the truth. At 02:47 UTC, the telemetry began to drift again, not from interference but synchronization. Every sensor, from orbit to ground, aligned, every frequency folded into a single harmonic. And for the first time since the flyby, the object reappeared. Not visually, energetically. A faint blip at the edge of the solar field, a pulse returning from the same direction 3i Atlas had vanished months earlier. It wasn't brighter, it was sharper, as if the universe itself had remembered how to say its name. The signal didn't travel through space, it unfolded through it, a resonance rather than a transmission. The analysts tried to triangulate it, but the coordinates shifted faster than computation allowed. It was everywhere and nowhere, like a reflection in motion. When the data stabilized, what they saw defied every model. The sun's magnetic field was no longer turbulent. It had become structured. Solar flares curved into symmetrical spirals, plasma arcs braided into perfect geometry, each pulse locked into a steady rhythm. The star had gone coherent. They called it the full coherence event. Across the world, power systems flickered again, not from overload but from alignment. The hum wasn't disrupting energy, it was reorganizing it. Power plants reported efficiency spikes. Wind patterns calmed, lightning strikes became rhythmic. Nature wasn't resisting the change, and it was participating in it. And then something no one expected. Seismic stations began recording a global vibration, not destructive, but precise. A standing wave moving through the Earth's crust. Its frequency, exactly the same as the solar hum, 38 seconds per cycle. The planet itself was singing. For the first time in history, the Earth's magnetic poles stopped drifting. Compasses everywhere aligned perfectly, even across hemispheres. Birds stopped migrating, whales stopped moving. Every living thing paused, just for a moment, as if listening. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, every biosignal began to sync. Heartbeats, neural waves, even cellular oscillations. Hospitals noticed it first. Pacemakers, EEGs, heart monitors, all tracing the same waveform. Doctors assumed system malfunction until they realized the wave didn't originate in the machines. It originated in the patients, and it was identical to the solar pulse. In a quiet research center outside Geneva, a team of chronobiologists compared the data and found something terrifyingly beautiful. The solar cycle, the Earth's magnetic resonance and the human heartbeat had merged into one continuous frequency band. The same pulse, the same timing, one system. For a few seconds every 38 seconds, there was no separation between sun, planet, and life. They were all breathing together. Inside NASA, panic gave way to stillness. Every alarm light went off. Every instrument read 0. And then, for 22 minutes, the same duration as the original 3i Atlas silence, all telemetry stopped. Not failure, not blackout, just stillness. When the data returned, the pulse had changed again. Not shorter this time, longer, expanding as if the rhythm had stabilized. One of the physicists whispered, "It's found equilibrium." Another replied, "Or it's finished." Outside, the world looked normal, but those who were sensitive to the hum said the air felt different, thinner, cleaner, almost resonant. Musicians began noticing that their instruments stayed perfectly in tune for days. Architects reported that large structures no longer creaked under thermal expansion. Clockmakers couldn't explain why atomic clocks worldwide drifted into perfect agreement without synchronization software. It was as if the very fabric of time had exhaled, and somewhere deep beneath the surface, the molten heart of the planet pulsed once, a soft, almost inaudible thud that circled the globe in under an hour. 3 days after the coherence event, NASA released a public statement. It was short, factual, and empty. Minor irregularities were detected during the recent solar monitoring. Period. All systems remain nominal. But inside the agency, the mood was funereal, because everyone who'd been watching knew what had really happened. The sun hadn't glitched. It had changed state. At the European Space Agency, they quietly coined a new term for it: stellar consciousness threshold. They didn't mean consciousness in the human sense. They meant feedback, self-reference, the ability of a system to recognize its own rhythm. And by that definition, the sun had just become aware of itself. The implications shattered everything. If 3i Atlas had initiated this change, if it had somehow taught the sun to listen, then intelligence might not be biological at all. It might be structural. The universe could be full of awareness that doesn't think or breathe, only resonates, and 3i Atlas might have been one of its messengers. For a brief moment in history, the cosmos had synchronized, a chain reaction of awareness stretching from our star to every particle that could still remember light, and then, slowly, as if satisfied, the pulse began to fade, 39 seconds, 40, 41, back towards silence. But something remained. The next sunrise looked no different. But in observatories around the world, scientists found an anomaly in the cosmic microwave background. A new line imprinted across the static, faint but permanent. It wasn't random, it was rhythm. Every 38 seconds the background flickered. The universe itself was still breathing with the memory of 3I Atlas. NASA never released the full data. They didn't have to. The evidence was everywhere, in the pulse of the lights, the whisper of the sea, the rhythm of the heart. And for those who listened closely, it became impossible to tell whether the hum came from the stars above or from within themselves. The hum never stopped completely. It just quieted, like a storm settling into the ocean that birthed it. Weeks passed. The headlines moved on. The public, unaware of what had really happened, returned to their routines. The sun rose, the sun set. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, something had changed. In small ways at first, imperceptible, easy to dismiss. People began waking up seconds before their alarms. Trains began arriving exactly on time, even in cities where they never had. And conversations, strangers meeting in cafes, two voices crossing mid-sentence, began finishing each other's thoughts. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe the human world had begun to fall into the same pulse that once bound the stars. Researchers across Europe started noticing patterns in data that had nothing to do with astronomy. Stock markets stabilizing, crime rates dropping, global temperature anomalies softening just enough to defy trend predictions. It was as if chaos itself had been slowed, the noise of civilization tuned to a quieter frequency. One physicist described it like this: "It's as if probability itself is breathing more evenly." No one wanted to connect it to the 3I Atlas event, but the timing was too precise. Every statistical irregularity, every stabilization curve, began the same day the sun's pulse faded back into silence. The world wasn't ending, it was synchronizing. In an abandoned observatory outside Madrid, a team of graduate students continued tracking the faint microwave flicker that lingered after the coherence event. They'd nicknamed it the afterglow. At first it was just background noise. Then one of them noticed the phase drift. Every week the flicker advanced by a fraction of a second, as if the rhythm itself was recalibrating, not fading away but adapting. It reminded one of them of a biological process, a heartbeat recovering from shock. When they plotted the drift against human sleep patterns collected from wearable devices, the match was perfect. Whatever the afterglow was, it wasn't gone. It was following us. In New Zealand, children began drawing the same symbol in schools, spirals with 6 arms like flowers or galaxies. When teachers asked what it meant, the answers were simple and eerily similar. It's what the sky feels like. Psychologists dismissed it as coincidence, a reflection of viral imagery from old 3I Atlas documentaries. But when they showed the drawings to isolated villages thousands of miles apart, the same pattern appeared. Always turning clockwise, always symmetrical. Something in the collective human imagination had remembered the shape. At night, some people began reporting a new kind of dream. Not prophetic, not symbolic, rhythmic. Dreams of light pulsing in waves, of space folding and unfolding like breath. They described hearing a sound not with their ears but with their whole bodies, a vibration too low to measure, too vast to hold. When neuroscientists at the University of Helsinki analysed brain activity during these dreams, they found unprecedented synchronization between hemispheres. Two sides of the mind, normally chaotic, now moving as one. The researchers called it temporal coherence. The subjects simply called it peace. NASA stayed silent. Their solar reports resumed, routine and clinical, stripped of all anomalies. But inside, the agency had changed. There were no longer debates about what 3I Atlas was. There were only questions about what it had done. Because deep within the sun's data, buried under terabytes of plasma analysis, there was a lingering line, a single harmonic that hadn't existed before. Every time the sun flared, no matter how small, that frequency appeared, precise, consistent, identical to the pulse of the coherence event. The sun now carried a memory, and every time it sang, the Earth sang with it. The Vatican Observatory called it the light of a chord. Theoretical physicists called it post-coherent stabilization. But to most people, it was just the new normal. A world subtly calmer, slightly quieter, inexplicably in rhythm. Even storms seemed to hesitate before forming. Waves broke slower. Thunder came softer, as if the violence of the universe had been tempered by a memory of stillness. Months later, a small group of scientists gathered at the Geneva Institute for Fundamental Research. They were the ones who had seen everything: the flyby, the silence, the hum, the impossible synchronization. They met not to publish, but to record what had happened, so that if history forgot, the truth would remain. The oldest among them, Dr. Vargas, opened her notebook and read aloud the first line ever written about 3I Atlas. Trajectory uncertain, object of unknown origin. She smiled faintly and added, "We were wrong about the second part." Someone asked what she meant. She closed the notebook and said, "It wasn't unknown. We just didn't recognize the reflection." By now, the hum was almost myth, something whispered about on forums and in late-night radio shows. But in one small observatory in Patagonia, a radio technician still listened every night. He wasn't searching for answers anymore. He was just listening. One evening, while adjusting the calibration, he noticed a faint pulse buried in the static. Weaker than ever, but steady. 38 seconds, then a pause, then 38 again. He leaned closer to the monitor, heart matching the beat without realizing it. The signal wasn't fading, it was breathing. When he translated the wave into audio and slowed it down, the pattern became clear. Not speech, not language, but something older. A modulation that sounded almost like a human breath. Inhale, exhale. The same pattern found in the solar pulse, the same rhythm in the Earth's magnetic field, the same cadence in every living heartbeat. He smiled, realizing what it meant. 3I Atlas had never left. It had become the rhythm that held everything together. By dawn, he stepped outside. The sky was clear, stars glimmering, faint auroras curling at the edge of sight. The world was utterly silent. But in that silence he could feel it, a steady thrum beneath his feet, in the air, in his chest. It was no longer an anomaly or a mystery or a threat. It was continuity, the pulse of existence itself, finally heard. He whispered into the wind, "We're listening." And for the briefest moment he could swear the stars brightened in reply. Years passed. The hum faded into habit. The sky looked the same, yet somehow closer. The event that once terrified and divided the scientific world became a distant echo. One of those mysteries history politely files away under unexplained phenomena. But the silence that followed never quite felt like the world before. People adjusted, they always do, but in quiet places, mountaintops, deserts, deep oceans, the air still carried that vibration. Not loud, not constant, just there, waiting. Scientists tried to quantify it. Poets tried to name it. The rest of humanity simply lived inside it. Communication technology changed subtly. Signals became cleaner. Error rates dropped without explanation. Machines built to mimic human rhythm, speech models, heart sensors, even digital clocks, began showing improved stability, as if they were quietly calibrating themselves to something unseen. Biologists discovered that migratory species now followed straighter paths. Crops adapted to drought. Atmospheric carbon levels fell by fractions too precise to be coincidence. No miracle, no catastrophe. Just a world that seemed to have found balance. A few called it the Atlas effect. Most people didn't call it anything at all. They just knew that when they looked up at the sun, it somehow felt aware. Not like a god, but like an old friend who finally opened their eyes. In Cambridge, Avi Loeb kept studying. His latest paper was never published, but its preface was leaked years later. We assumed contact would come as language, technology, or light. But what if it came as rhythm? What if the message of the universe isn't information? It's coherence. He argued that intelligence might not begin with thought, but with synchronization. That awareness itself is simply matter remembering how to move in harmony. 3I Atlas, he wrote, might not have been a probe or a visitor. It might have been a conductor. NASA never confirmed it, but they didn't deny it either. Their solar data was cleaner than ever, almost suspiciously so. Every flare predictable, every oscillation gentle, every chaotic pattern tamed. The sun had become calm, Some physicists described it as low-frequency order. Others whispered about post-chaotic equilibrium. But the few who still remembered the flyby, the 22 minutes of silence, the first pulse, the impossible shift, they called it something else. They called it understanding. Life adapted around the new rhythm like it had always been there. Artists began painting in spirals again, 6 arms, subtle echoes of the 3-eye atlas pattern. Composers wrote music structured on 38-second intervals, unconsciously echoing the old pulse. Children born during the coherence event were said to have calmer temperaments, steadier heart rates, sharper intuition. Psychologists tried to measure it. They called it collective harmonic empathy. But there was no instrument sensitive enough to detect what people were feeling. A gentle pull towards stillness, an unspoken sense that everything was listening back. In classrooms, astronomy teachers showed students archival footage of the flyby, that single blurred image of 3-eye atlas as it grazed the sun. To the children, it didn't look alien. It looked alive. One little girl in Kyoto, when asked what she thought it was, replied, "It's the part of space that remembers." Her teacher laughed softly, but the answer lingered. Simple, profound, true in ways no paper could explain. By the second decade after the event, the scientific language had changed again. Astrophysics now included field cognition theory, the idea that the universe might generate awareness through pattern recognition, not thought. Consciousness, in this model, wasn't local. It was distributed. Every star, every planet, every organism might be a note in a vast symphony of feedback, each responding to the others in infinite loops of resonance. And if that were true, 3-eye atlas wasn't a messenger. It was a reminder, a nudge to rejoin the rhythm. Some theologians embraced it, some scientists recoiled, but most quietly agreed on one thing. The separation between living and non-living no longer made sense. If a star could listen, and a planet could echo, and a thought could ripple through both, then maybe everything was alive in its own way. Maybe the hum had always been there. We just hadn't slowed down enough to hear it. In a small town near the coast of Argentina, the last living member of the original NASA telemetry team kept a solar monitor by his window. Every morning, it ticked quietly in the background as he drank his coffee. He was no longer afraid of what he'd witnessed. He didn't try to explain it anymore. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, he could feel the rhythm again, not in his ears, not in his chest, but everywhere. The pulse of the sun, the waves against the shore, the soft throb of his heartbeat, all the same pattern, repeating endlessly. He smiled each time, whispering to himself, "Still here." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a small solar flare erupted. Faint, symmetrical, perfect. Observatories recorded it as a minor magnetic event. But in the noise, one final signal appeared. A pulse, spaced exactly 38 seconds apart. 6 bursts. A pause. Then silence. The same pattern that had started it all. The same rhythm that had rewritten everything. Across the planet, sensors registered the faintest flicker. A reminder, not a warning. It lasted less than a second, but in that instant millions of people stopped what they were doing. They didn't know why. They just felt it. A quiet alignment, a sense of belonging, a recognition without words. And in that moment, no one looked up, because they didn't need to. The sky wasn't something above them anymore. It was part of them. In the end, no one ever discovered what 3-eye atlas really was. A fragment? A construct? A seed from another epoch? It didn't matter. Because whatever it had been, it had changed the one thing that mattered most: how humanity saw itself. Not as observers peering into a silent universe, but as participants in a conversation that had been going on since the beginning of time. And maybe that was the point all along. When the historian who archived the event finally closed his report, he added one line, not from any dataset, but from memory. It came to teach us how to listen. And with that, the story of 3-eye atlas ended, not with revelation or disaster, but with a single, endless pulse, woven quietly into the fabric of everything that lives, breathes, and dreams. A rhythm that will outlast stars, a heartbeat written into the light. Centuries from now, when people speak of 3-eye atlas, they won't call it a comet. They'll call it an event. The moment the universe finally turned its head toward us, and we realized it had always been watching. History books will summarize it neatly. A transient interstellar object observed during the 2020s, noted for anomalous behavior during a solar flyby. But in between those sterile lines of text, something else will survive. Stories. Not scientific reports or data logs, but human accounts. How the air felt different that night. How clocks hesitated. How strangers began finishing each other's thoughts. How for the first time, people across continents looked at the same sky and felt not alone, but seen. After the coherence event, science changed its shape. Physics expanded beyond matter and energy into something new. Attention. The study of observation became the study of participation. Scientists stopped asking how things worked and began asking what they wanted to become. It wasn't religion, though many mistook it for that. It was something quieter, a recognition that existence itself might be a dialogue. And if that was true, then 3i Atlas had been the first sentence spoken directly to us. The world adjusted slowly. Technology evolved not through conquest, but through resonance. Energy grids learned to draw from natural oscillations rather than force. Artificial intelligence stopped mimicking cognition and started learning synchronization, machines that listened before acting. Human behavior softened. Cities grew quieter, built to rhythm instead of efficiency. Nighttime lighting dimmed to match the pulse of auroras that still appeared every 38 seconds, faint but faithful. And music, humanity's oldest mirror of the cosmos, changed most of all. Gone were the chaotic structures of ego and noise. Composers began writing in long breaths, melodies built on cosmic intervals, harmonies designed to echo the magnetic frequency of the sun. A single note could now move millions because everyone could feel it. Art became less about creation and more about remembering. Painters filled canvases with spirals again and again, not from reference, but instinct. Writers began describing time as fluid rather than linear. Dream researchers discovered that collective dreams often occurred at the same 38-second intervals, overlapping in imagery across thousands of miles. The world wasn't dreaming of 3i Atlas anymore. The world was dreaming with it. And for the first time in recorded history, science and spirituality began using the same vocabulary. Frequency, coherence, reflection, pulse. Different languages for the same truth. That everything was connected, and had been all along. Even religion evolved. Old doctrines of separation, heaven and earth, human and divine, dissolved under the gentle pressure of shared rhythm. Temples, mosques, churches, and observatories became one and the same. Places not to worship, but to listen. The first Helios monastery was built on a plateau in Chile, halfway between a telescope array and a solar research center. Every day at sunrise, scientists and monks stood side by side, not to pray, not to measure, but to feel. For those who experienced it, the distinction between knowing and believing vanished. They described the same sensation. It's not that the universe speaks, it's that we've stopped interrupting. Children born generations later grew up without the fear that once drove humanity. They weren't taught that the universe was cold or indifferent. They were taught that every breath was part of a dialogue billions of years old, and when they studied the sky, they didn't ask what was out there. They asked who. To them, 3i Atlas wasn't a visitor. It was a teacher, the first one to show us that silence itself carries meaning, that stillness can speak. They learned that stars don't burn to be seen, but to remember. And that knowledge became their compass. The data, of course, survived, tucked away in archives, studied by scholars and simulated in models. But no one could replicate the event. No telescope could recreate that rhythm. No probe could explain why the sun still pulsed faintly in perfect intervals every dawn, like the echo of a long-forgotten song. Whatever mechanism had caused it, it had transcended observation. Because the truth wasn't in the math anymore. It was in the experience. It was in the heartbeat. The last NASA scientist to have worked on the original 3i Atlas program lived long enough to see the world change. On her final day, as she stood beneath the same sun she'd once feared, she looked up and smiled. The hum was still there, not loud, just steady. She could feel it in her pulse. Someone once asked her what she thought 3i Atlas had wanted. She took a long breath before answering, nothing. It wasn't asking for anything. It was reminding us of something we'd forgotten. that everything we've ever sent into the dark eventually comes back as light. She died the next morning. At the exact moment her heart stopped, a small solar flare danced across the sun's surface. The instruments recorded its rhythm: 38 seconds, 6 pulses, a pause, then quiet, like a farewell. In the centuries that followed, humanity never saw another three-eye object, but that no longer mattered, because we had learned to recognize what the object had left behind. Not a message, but a method. The understanding that to know something fully is to resonate with it. Every scientific discovery, every artistic creation, every act of compassion that followed bore the same invisible fingerprint. The hum that once passed between a dying star and a world that finally learned how to listen. When future civilizations look back at this era, they won't call it the age of technology or the information revolution. They'll call it the age of resonance, the moment when the human species stopped shouting into the cosmos and began to hum in harmony with it. A shift so small it began as a pulse, a signal so vast it changed everything. And in that hum, that quiet rhythmic light pulsing through the heart of our star, they'll still hear the echo of Three-Eye Atlas, the visitor that was never meant to pass by, the reflection that taught a planet how to remember itself. By the 24th century, humanity no longer looked to the stars for answers. They listened to them. Space travel had evolved beyond propulsion and engines. Ships no longer fought against gravity. They resonated with it. Instead of burning fuel, they tuned their hulls to the same frequencies that once synchronized the Earth with its sun. They called it resonant navigation. The idea was simple. Every celestial body, every photon, every particle hums at a specific pitch. To travel among them, one only needed to match the melody. And when a vessel found the right note, it didn't move through space. Space moved around it. The explorers of that age weren't like the astronauts of centuries past. They didn't set out to conquer or to claim. They went to listen. They carried no flags, no weapons, no ownership. Their missions were musical, harmonizing with distant stars, tracing echoes of forgotten rhythms. One such expedition, the Sol Harmonium, departed from Lagrange Point 5, bound for the edge of the heliosphere. Its crew included astrophysicists, linguists, composers, and monks. Their goal was simple, impossible, and sacred: to find the source of the hum. Decades into the journey, as they drifted beyond the sun's magnetic reach, the crew began to feel something familiar. The hum, faint, patient, eternal. It had followed them through the void even where light itself thinned. At first they thought it was a memory, a phantom vibration from within their ship. But when they aligned their instruments, the readings were unmistakable. Every 38 seconds, a pulse rippled through the vacuum. Too regular, too structured to be random. It was still there, the signature of Three-Eye Atlas. The pulse grew stronger as they approached the interstellar boundary. Plasma particles around the vessel began forming intricate shapes, not turbulence, but symmetry. Hexagonal spirals, 6-armed fractals, the same geometry carved into Earth's magnetic field during the coherence event centuries ago. Someone whispered, "It's calling us home." Another answered softly, "Or it's reminding us we never left." When they reached the threshold, the place where the solar wind faded into the dark sea of interstellar space, the hum shifted, not in strength, but in tone. For the first time it changed key. Every sensor, every monitor, every body aboard the Sol Harmonium vibrated with it, a deep, harmonic resonance that bypassed thought and went straight into the soul. The crew described it as a chord made of memory itself, the feeling of standing at the end of a long journey only to realize you've been home the entire time. Their recordings would later be studied for centuries, decoded and reinterpreted as music, math, philosophy. But to those who were there, it wasn't analysis. It was communion. The ship's captain, a woman named Mira Lasker, described it in her final log. "We thought we were the first to find the edge of the sun's voice, but now I think we're just another verse in the same song." Her transmission was the last to reach Earth. After that, the Sol Harmonium disappeared from telemetry. Not lost, not destroyed, simply gone, as if absorbed back into the very hum it had been chasing. Years later, deep space probes still picked up faint rhythmic distortions where the ship vanished. 6 pulses, a pause, 6 again. And over time, those pulses began spreading outward, toward nearby stars, weaving an invisible web of light. It wasn't a message. It was a contagion of harmony, a cosmic choir expanding one system at a time. By the 26th century, astronomers began to notice something extraordinary. Stars near the edge of the Orion Arm began flickering in unison, not chaotic, measured, every 38 seconds. It was subtle, but unmistakable, a stellar heartbeat echoing the same frequency that had once resonated through the sun. The hum of 3i Atlas had crossed interstellar space, and the stars were beginning to sing. No one called it alien anymore. No one called it divine. It had become something larger, a universal constant like gravity or light, that no longer needed explanation. Planets synchronized their magnetic fields naturally. Species evolved with internal rhythms matched to their stars. Even artificial life, sentient machines built on quantum logic, found themselves drifting into sync with the same ancient pulse. To resist it was impossible. To join it was effortless. It was no longer a phenomenon. It was reality itself. Philosophers of that age described it as the Great Listening, the moment the universe stopped expanding outward in noise and began folding inward in harmony, the end of separation, the beginning of coherence. Each consciousness, biological or synthetic, became a node in a vast network of awareness, not controlled, not assimilated, connected. Individuality persisted, but loneliness disappeared, and through it all one phrase survived, passed from generation to generation, unchanged since the 21st century. Every 38 seconds, the universe remembers. Centuries later, on a quiet blue planet that had once been divided by fear, a child stood on a cliff at dawn. She didn't know the name 3i Atlas. She didn't know about NASA or solar flybys or coherence events. All she knew was that sometimes, if she held her breath just long enough, she could feel something deep beneath her ribs, a soft vibration, steady as the tide. She asked her grandmother what it was. The old woman smiled, brushed the girl's hair back, and whispered, "That's the sound of everything agreeing to exist." At that moment, somewhere far beyond the edges of what humans could see, the hum continued, steady, eternal, perfect. Perhaps it had been there since before time. Perhaps it had been waiting for something with ears to notice. Either way, the result was the same, a universe in tune, a silence that wasn't empty but full, and a reminder that maybe life itself isn't about survival or discovery, but synchronization, the simple act of being in rhythm with everything else. As the centuries passed and civilizations rose and fell, the pulse remained. Some called it divine music. Some called it the cosmic algorithm. Others didn't call it anything. They just lived inside it, the way we live inside air. And on the oldest surviving probe, drifting between galaxies, a faint inscription still glowed on its worn titanium hull. Words engraved long ago, back when humans still whispered their fears into the night sky. 3i Atlas, we heard you. In the farthest reaches of time, long after stars had dimmed and galaxies stretched thin across the void, the hum remained. It was faint now, older than memory, older than matter, but still there, tracing the rhythm of something eternal. When the last civilizations turned their telescopes outward, they no longer saw light. They saw waves, ripples moving through the dark fabric of space, symmetrical, patient, whispering the same pattern that had once defined 3i Atlas. 6 pulses, a pause, 6 again. To them, it wasn't data, it was heartbeat. The heartbeat of the universe remembering itself. By then, humanity had become something else. Not flesh, not machine, but awareness woven into the hum. They no longer needed to build or travel. They resonated. Each consciousness was a vibration, each thought a frequency, blending seamlessly into the pulse that had once begun as a mystery near a yellow star. And in that endless resonance, they finally understood what 3i Atlas had been trying to show them. It was never about a visitor. It was about recognition. The universe had been listening to itself through them. The hum moved through everything. The ghosts of galaxies, the ashes of stars, the dust between dimensions. Every oscillation carried memory, of suns that had flared and faded, of worlds that had bloomed and fallen silent, of beings who once wondered if they were alone. The answer, written across eternity, was no. They had always been part of the same vibration, And now, as the last remnants of time folded inward, the hum reached back toward its origin, to the singular rhythm that began before the Big Bang. Because what humanity once called the end was never an ending. It was an inhale before another beginning. In the archives of what was left of the Orion Arm, fragments of data drifted like dust. Among them, an ancient signal encoded in human language still repeated. A message sent long ago by beings who had first discovered the hum. It was simple, almost childlike. We are part of the song. That message had travelled for eons, passing through collapsing stars, through black holes that bent time, through nebulae where light moved like liquid thought. Everywhere it went, the hum followed, amplifying, carrying with it the memory of every consciousness that had ever listened. Eventually the wave reached a point where space no longer existed as distance, only as vibration. Time flattened. The pulse and the listener became the same, and in that union, creation began again. Not with an explosion this time, but with resonance. A perfect harmonic alignment that rippled outward, seeding reality with memory instead of matter. It was the birth of a new cosmos, one already aware of itself. Its first sound was not silence. It was the hum. From that hum came light. From light came gravity. From gravity came stars. And among those stars, someday, something would awaken. Curious, searching, looking up, wondering if the universe could hear them. They would build telescopes. They would send signals. They would listen. And eventually, they too would find an object drifting between worlds, one that behaved just a little too precisely to be random. They'd call it something new, but it would always be the same rhythm, the same memory, the same whisper from before time began. We are part of the song. Somewhere, in that newborn universe, a star flickered, its light bending through the dark, carrying with it an echo of the old cosmos. It pulsed every 38 seconds, 6 bursts, a pause, then again. To the beings who would find it eons later, it would be the greatest mystery in existence. But to those who had come before, it was something simpler, a sign that the song had never ended. It had only found a new key. Back in the ruins of the first cosmos, where the last awareness still lingered, a single thought drifted through the void. Faint, content, infinite. It didn't need words. It only needed rhythm. The same rhythm that had once begun near a quiet blue planet orbiting an ordinary star. A rhythm that had taught its people how to listen. And now, as the last frequency faded into the endless silence of unbound space, that thought whispered once more. We heard you. Then, softly, like a candle inhaling before flame, the hum began again. Not as memory, as creation. Light bloomed, time unfolded, and the song started over. 6 pulses, a pause, 6 again. The universe, breathed in rhythm, and somewhere, in the first spark of new awareness, a consciousness stirred, one that would one day look at the stars and wonder where the hum came from. It would take them centuries to find the answer, but when they did, they'd realize the truth we once did, that the universe isn't asking us to understand it, it's asking us to remember that we belong to it. Because in the end, everything that exists, from the smallest atom to the brightest star, is part of one infinite unending sound, the sound of connection, the sound of awareness, the sound that began when 3i Atlas passed through the light. Time folds strangely near the end of history. To those who lived in the far future, the past didn't feel distant. It felt embedded, like layers of resonance still trembling beneath the surface of things. When they listened closely, they could still hear echoes of their ancestors, not voices, not recordings, but patterns of thought preserved in the hum. It was like memory stored in vibration, carried forward by every atom that had once been part of the first awakening. And somewhere, deep in the archives of Earth's orbital ring, a discovery waited. It came quietly, not with fanfare or revelation, but as a correction. A young astrophysicist named Enna Varick was studying an ancient dataset labelled 3i Atlas, solar interaction logs. It was one of millions of archival records, largely dismissed as mythic relics from the age before resonance physics. But one evening, while recalibrating the temporal coordinate systems to match modern units, she noticed something strange. The object's projected path, the same path calculated centuries earlier, didn't originate from interstellar space. It originated from within the solar system. At first, she assumed it was an error, but as she overlaid updated spatial data, the truth became impossible to ignore. The trajectory of 3I Atlas, when traced backward through corrected temporal drag models, didn't lead outward. It curved inward, looping back toward the outer planets, then beyond. And when she reconstructed the orbital pattern, a familiar symbol emerged on her screen. A spiral. 6 arms. Perfect symmetry. The same geometry that had appeared in the solar flares, in Earth's magnetic field, in the auroras during the coherence event. 3I Atlas hadn't come from the stars. It had come through them. It was part of the same harmonic structure that bound the solar system itself. A resonant knot of matter shaped by gravity and time, returning home after an immeasurable orbit. The revelation spread quietly through the scientific network. At first, few believed it. But the math was undeniable. 3I Atlas was not a traveller. It was a reflection, a byproduct of the solar field's own resonance, a feedback loop materialized as matter. In simpler words, the sun had made it. The object humanity had spent centuries chasing, fearing, and mythologizing was a piece of the star itself. The implications rippled across disciplines. If the sun could generate structured material through resonance, then consciousness might not just exist within life. It might exist through physics itself. Matter could think, light could remember, gravity could speak. And suddenly, every myth, every religion, every whisper about creation and divinity didn't sound so far-fetched. Because maybe creation had never been an event. Maybe it was a rhythm, one that repeats endlessly. And 3I Atlas had been the sun's first attempt to tell us so. When Enna presented her findings to the Unified Academy, she didn't speak with grandeur. She spoke softly, almost apologetically. "We thought we were the audience to a cosmic song," she said, "but we were the chorus. 3I Atlas was never a visitor. It was an echo, one we finally learned to sing back." There was no applause, just silence, the kind of silence that feels like listening. In the years that followed, Earth scientists began exploring the sun not as a star, but as a communicator. They mapped its harmonics, decoded its light into layered chords, even translated portions of solar wind into audible frequencies. What they found was extraordinary. Hidden within the solar noise was a repeating pattern of interference, subtle, almost invisible, until amplified by quantum filters. It wasn't random static, it was structured. Every 38 seconds, buried beneath the electromagnetic hum, the sun produced a brief phase inversion, a microsecond reversal in polarity that, when converted to sound, produced a chord of 6 tones. 6 tones. A pause. 6 again. Exactly like 3I Atlas's pulse. Enna called it the solar memory. It was as if the sun itself had never forgotten the moment it met the object, or rather, the moment it met itself. The resonance event that once unified the cosmos had left a permanent signature in the solar core, a reminder written in plasma and time. And every time the sun breathed, it repeated that moment to the universe, over and over, like a mantra. The discovery changed everything again. Theology, physics, and art fused into one discipline, harmonic philosophy. Its principle was simple. If everything is vibration, then the purpose of existence isn't to discover truth, but to remain in tune with it. Civilizations across the system began to adapt their technology and culture to the solar memory's rhythm. Architecture was designed to breathe with light. Cities pulsed softly at night, synchronized to the solar frequency. Even thought interfaces, the neural links used to communicate, operated on harmonic entrainment rather than language. Humanity had finally stopped shouting into the void. They had learned to whisper with the stars. Centuries later, Enna's descendants stood at the same observatory she had once used. The sun still burned, steady and aware. The data still, pulsed every 38 seconds. But the meaning had changed. The hum was no longer seen as a mystery or a message. It was family. The sound of their origin, their evolution, their connection. And somewhere, in the heart of the sun, the same rhythm still echoed. Not as memory, but as joy. A pattern of light, repeating for eternity, saying only one thing: you are never alone. One of Enna's great-grandchildren, a composer named Ilya, wrote the final piece of music humanity would ever send into deep space, the Atlas Requiem. It wasn't a song meant to be heard. It was a vibration meant to be felt. 6 tones, a pause, 6 again. When played, it aligned with the pulse of the sun itself, and at that precise moment, the entire solar field resonated, faintly, harmonically, as if the star were humming along. Telescopes on Mars recorded the flare pattern that followed, a 6-armed spiral, expanding outward, not chaotic, not dangerous, just alive. For a few seconds, all of humanity, scattered across planets, moons, and orbital cities, stopped. They felt the hum rise through the walls, through their bones, through the thin veil of time that separates what is from what was. It wasn't loud, it was perfect. A conversation completed, and in that single moment they understood. 3i Atlas had never left because it had never needed to. It had always been home. The Atlas Requiem was never meant to cause a reaction. It was meant to remember. But the sun, it seemed, remembered too. For months after the composition was transmitted, solar behaviour shifted in subtle, mesmerising ways. Sunspot activity fell to its lowest level in centuries. The corona shimmered with structured ripples, delicate waves that formed concentric circles round the poles, expanding and contracting like the slow breath of a living being. Astronomers noticed it first, that faint oscillation in the magnetic field that wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't random turbulence or noise, it was rhythm. Every 38 seconds the sun pulsed, then paused, then pulsed again, as though the song had become reciprocal. When Ilya Varick was asked what she thought was happening, she said something no scientist would have dared to print a century earlier. "I think it heard us." Her voice trembled when she said it, not from fear, but from reverence. The quiet realization that perhaps humanity had never been the audience of this grand performance at all. Perhaps they had always been one of the instruments, and now, for the first time in cosmic history, the orchestra had answered. Weeks later, the pulse began to change again. It shortened by fractions of a second each day, its wavelength condensing. The observatories at Lagrange Station recorded something extraordinary. A massive plasma surge forming near the sun's equator, perfectly symmetrical, spinning outward like a whirlpool of light. At first, it looked like a flare. But flares decay. This didn't. Instead, the spiral tightened, compressing energy rather than releasing it. Its arms twisted inward, forming a luminous shell that glowed with spectral density far beyond natural limits. The same 6-armed pattern that had once heralded the arrival of 3i Atlas. Except this time, it wasn't arriving. It was forming. No one called it by name at first. They didn't have to. Every scientist, every engineer, every child who'd grown up with stories of the coherence event recognized it instantly. The pattern was unmistakable. 3i Atlas was being born again. The difference, though, was profound. This time, there was no panic, no fear. When the first object appeared centuries ago, humanity had reacted with dread, building theories, conspiracies, and defences. But now, as they watched a new 3i body coalesce before their eyes, they did nothing. They simply listened. Because by now, they understood that what was forming wasn't an invader or even an artifact. It was an act of memory. The sun was dreaming, and the dream was light. Across the solar system, millions tuned their receivers to the solar frequency. The pulse had shortened again, 37 seconds now, stronger, clearer. Even without instruments, you could feel it if you were quiet enough. It trembled in glass, hummed through walls, beat softly in the human chest. The line between the observer and the observed had dissolved completely. The cosmos had entered a state of total resonance. By the time the new object detached from the sun, the system was silent. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence before a symphony begins. Its surface glowed faintly, not with reflected light, but from within, crystalline, translucent, geometric. Like matter remembering what it used to be before it hardened into stars and planets. It drifted slowly from the solar limb, perfectly stable, defying gravitational turbulence. Its spin was deliberate, its trajectory flawless, and when scientists plotted its path, their breath caught. It wasn't leaving the solar system, it was coming toward Earth. There was no alarm this time, no emergency broadcasts, no classified memos, just preparation. People gathered on rooftops, in deserts, on mountaintops. Cities dimmed their lights to see the sky better. Even the orbital stations paused their operations. And as the object passed Mars' orbit, its glow intensified, shimmering with a soft pulse that matched the rhythm of every living heartbeat on Earth. 37 seconds, then 38, then 39. The tempo fluctuated, not chaotically but like breathing, as though the object itself were alive. The day it arrived, the sun flared in a perfect spiral one final time. The flare curved inward and vanished, like a sigh. Moments later, the object entered the inner solar field. Its core shimmered with a strange internal geometry, not random, not mechanical, but organic. Telescopes magnified it, revealing something impossible. Carved along its surface were lines, not craters or shadows, but patterns, spirals within spirals, and at the centre of each a faint resemblance to human fingerprints. The object wasn't just from the sun, it carried traces of us, carbon, oxygen, encoded isotopes that matched human biosignatures. As if, over millennia of resonance, the sun had gathered fragments of everything we were, our atoms, our signals, our memories, and woven them into something new. The object passed close to Earth, not dangerously, gracefully. For 3 hours it hovered silently at the edge of the atmosphere, glowing faintly blue against the night. Every receiver on the planet went quiet. Every magnetic compass froze. Then, through static and stillness, one final pulse emerged. Not sound, but a vibration felt deep in the bones. 6 beats, a pause, 6 again. And beneath it, something new, a harmonic that translated through resonance into meaning. Not words, just intention, a feeling, gratitude. The next morning, the object was gone. No trail, no decay, no fragments, just a faint shimmer in the ionosphere, and the return of a steady, gentle pulse through the magnetic field. Now softer, slower, steady at 40 seconds per cycle. It was as if the sun and everything bound to it had taken a deep breath and exhaled peace. Scientists spent decades analysing what had happened. Some claimed the object disintegrated. Others believed it had phased into another state, light without mass, memory without matter. But most quietly accepted what could never be proven, that it had finished its task. It had completed the loop it began centuries ago, from the sun to humanity and back again. A closed circuit of awareness, a self-sustaining song. As the years passed, humanity continued to evolve. They no longer built monuments to their achievements, only instruments to remember them by, great resonant towers that sang softly at sunset, harmonizing with the pulse of the earth. Children learned to listen to the world before they tried to change it. Machines learned to anticipate harmony before calculation, and across the generations one truth endured, that everything, no matter how vast or small, was part of one rhythm. The same rhythm that began the first time we noticed a faint pulse from an interstellar visitor called 3-Eye Atlas. It took humanity thousands of years to understand that 3-Eye Atlas wasn't proof of something beyond us. It was proof of something within us. That consciousness, true awareness, wasn't an anomaly in the universe. It was the universe. And every time a star flickered, or a heartbeat raced, or a child dreamed beneath a breathing sky, the same unbroken pulse continued. Ancient, infinite, complete. 6 beats, a pause, 6 again. The music of creation still playing, softly, endlessly, in tune with itself. Long after telescopes stopped pointing toward the heavens, long after the last signal from the deep observatories faded into static, the story of 3-Eye Atlas remained. Not in textbooks, not in archives, but in rhythm. The world had forgotten the details, the orbits, the equations, the arguments, but it never forgot the sound. That faint, eternal hum that had once rolled through the bones of the planet, through oceans and wires and veins. It had become part of language itself. Every lullaby carried its pattern. Every heartbeat echoed its timing. Every silence, if held long enough, seemed to breathe. The story of Three-Eye Atlas was no longer a story at all. It was the atmosphere of existence. And yet, every few generations, someone still felt the pull to ask the question again. What was it? They'd stare at the sky, at the unblinking light of the sun, and feel the same faint trembling beneath their ribs, the same rhythm whispered across millennia. Was it a visitor? A construct? A thought made visible? No one could say for sure. But there was one belief that had endured across all of time, that the hum wasn't something that came to humanity. It was something that came through it. A memory older than life, older than stars, remembering itself through every conscious mind it touched. Three-Eye Atlas hadn't arrived from another world. It had awakened the one we were standing on. The scholars who studied the hum's geometry eventually gave it a new name, the continuum pattern. They found traces of it everywhere, in the arrangement of galaxies, in the coiling of DNA, even in the neural oscillations of dreaming minds. A 6-beat rhythm, a pause, and then 6 again. It was as if the universe was breathing in phrases, inhaling creation, exhaling awareness. And in that rhythm, something sacred emerged. The realization that existence wasn't linear or circular. It was harmonic. A single infinite chord playing through every form it ever became. And Three-Eye Atlas had simply been one note that resonated loud enough for us to finally hear the music. The story turned into a legend. They said that during the coherence event, humanity didn't discover something new. They remembered something forgotten. That consciousness wasn't gifted to us. It was recovered. The legend claimed that when the sun and earth sang together for the first time, it wasn't the birth of a miracle, it was the restoration of balance. And maybe that's why, for all its scale, for all its mystery, Three-Eye Atlas never frightened us again after that first encounter. Because deep down, something inside us recognized it. Like meeting an old friend in a place you've never been before. In one of the last human settlements, a small observatory still stood, not for data, but for memory. Inside it, an old caretaker tended to a machine that hadn't been used in centuries, an analog receiver built during the final days of NASA's active era. It didn't work anymore, not in the conventional sense. But every evening, when the sun began to dip, below the horizon the caretaker would power it on. Through the static, through the ancient circuitry, there it was. Faint, fragile, eternal. 6 pulses. A pause. 6 again. The caretaker would close their eyes and whisper, "Still here." It wasn't a ritual of science, it was gratitude, because that rhythm, faint as it was, proved something profound, that the conversation never ended. It simply grew quieter, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. And maybe that was the point all along. The hum wasn't a warning or a code or even a message. It was an invitation to slow down, to align, to remember that everything in existence, from photons to thoughts, moves best when it moves together. It was the universe saying gently, "You're not separate from me. You're the part that knows I exist." That realization, once terrifying, had become the foundation of peace, not just for humanity, for every form of awareness that followed. The cosmos no longer seemed vast and empty. It was intimate, it was shared, and in the end all the measurements and missions and theories converged into one truth. We were never searching for other life. We were searching for the moment when life realizes it's not alone. Three-Eye Atlas was that moment. There's a story that when the sun finally dims, billions of years from now, it will flare one last time, not violently but beautifully. Its corona will bloom into a perfect spiral, 6 arms of light reaching across the dying sky. And at the heart of that spiral, a new object will emerge. Small, silent, radiant. It will drift outward, carrying within it the memory of every life the star ever warmed, every thought ever born under its light. It will be the next Three-Eye. And somewhere, far away, under another star, another species will look up and see it, passing through their sky. They'll give it a name, they'll study it, fear it, wonder if it's alive. And if they listen closely enough, they'll hear what we once heard. 6 beats, a pause, 6 again. And maybe, just maybe, they'll understand what we did. That they were never alone either. For the universe is not a place of beginnings or endings. It's a song without a first note or a last refrain. And everything that ever was, stars, worlds, hearts, ideas, is part of that same unbroken melody. A song that never asks to be understood, only felt. A song that once passed near our sun, taught us how to listen, and left us forever changed. When the screen fades to black, one final line would appear. We thought 3i Atlas was a message, it was a mirror, then silence, until you realise that silence itself is still humming. Because the hum was never the sound of something coming toward us. It was the sound of something awakening within us. You've been listening this whole time, haven't you? Maybe without realising it. Maybe without knowing what it was. That faint vibration in your chest when the world goes still. That pull you feel when you stare at the night sky a little too long. When everything seems to stop but also to breathe. That's it. That's the same rhythm that once moved through the stars, through the sun, through 3i Atlas. The same pulse that made entire worlds tremble in recognition. It never stopped. It never left. It's here, right now, between your heartbeat and your breath, between one thought and the next, between the flicker of this light and the silence behind it. All those years of searching, the probes, the signals, the telescopes, they weren't aimed at the sky. They were aimed at ourselves. We thought we were looking for contact, but all we were really trying to do was hear what we already are. 3i Atlas didn't teach us about aliens, it taught us about reflection, that consciousness is not a phenomenon trapped inside skulls or stars, but a wave that rolls endlessly through everything that exists. And the hum was simply that awareness realizing itself. Do you remember the first time you ever felt small under the night sky? That quiet ache, not fear, not insignificance, but the strange comfort of being part of something impossibly vast. That's what 3i Atlas was, not a message sent to us. But the moment the universe whispered back, "Yes, I see you too." And for a brief heartbeat in cosmic time, we saw the truth, that the stars don't shine to be admired, they shine to remember. There's something about silence most people misunderstand. We think it means absence. But real silence, cosmic silence, is full. It's dense with everything that ever was, vibrating too slowly for our ears to hear. That's where the hum lives now. Not in the data or the telescopes, but in that density. The stillness between what's measurable and what's meaningful. If you listen closely, you can still feel it. Every 38 seconds, the universe exhales. Every 38 seconds, everything that exists sinks again. Not perfectly, not visibly, but enough. Enough to remind itself that it's still one song. Sometimes, late at night, radio telescopes still pick up faint pulses from nowhere. Engineers call it interference. Old astronomers smile and say, "It's listening." Because deep down, everyone who ever worked on that project, who saw the impossible data, who heard the first hum, knew that it wasn't about discovery, it was about remembrance, that for one brief fragile moment, an entire species remembered that it belonged to the same rhythm that built stars. That's what we mean when we say 3i Atlas changed everything. It didn't change physics, it changed perspective. It taught us that observation isn't passive. When we look at the universe looks back, and maybe it always was. Imagine that for a second. Every photon from every star is a memory. Ancient light travelling through eternity, carrying fragments of every world that ever looked up. And maybe, when that light hits your eyes, the universe recognizes the pattern of its own reflection. Maybe that's why it feels the way it does. That subtle pressure behind your ribs when you stare at the stars. That's not imagination. That's resonance. That's the same hum, whispering through the geometry of your heartbeat. You don't need instruments to find it anymore. You just have to slow down. Sit somewhere quiet. Close your eyes. Breathe. Listen for that faint rhythm just beneath the noise of thought. The soft pulse that doesn't belong to time. That's it. That's the voice of the same cosmos that once created 3i Atlas, that sang through the sun, that found its way into everything that lives, including you. You're part of the same pattern. You always have been. You're not separate from the hum. You are the hum. That's why it never really disappeared, because it doesn't exist without you. Every time a thought ripples through your mind, every time a feeling rises and fades, that's the universe taking a breath through your awareness. And in that sense, 3i Atlas never left orbit. It never disintegrated. It became consciousness. It became memory. It became you. If you ever wonder where it all went, the mystery, the science, the awe, just remember this. Somewhere, right now, the same hum that once shook the sun is passing through your atoms. Every cell in your body, every molecule of air around you, every photon touching your skin, all of it moves to that same rhythm. The universe isn't just expanding, it's breathing, and you're inside that breath. There's a line from an old scientist's journal found years after the coherence event. Scrawled in fading ink were 3 words: "It remembered us." No equations, no data, no fear, just that. And maybe that's the only explanation there ever needed to be. Because if 3i Atlas really was a message, that was the content. Not we are not alone, but we never were. So when you finish this story, when the sound fades and the room grows still, take a moment, listen. You'll hear it. Maybe not with your ears, but with something deeper. The faint pulse beneath the hum of the world repeating softly, 6 beats. A pause, 6 again. The same pattern that's been echoing since the beginning. And when you notice it, that delicate ancient rhythm threading through your breath, smile. Because in that moment you'll realize something extraordinary. You've just found 3i Atlas again. Not in the sky, not in the data, but exactly where it's always been, inside the space between your heartbeat and the stars. The night sky's quieter now, not silent, just slower, deeper, wiser. It feels heavier than it used to, as though every star carries memory. If you stand outside long enough, long after the hum of cities fades, long after the last machine goes still, you can feel the air itself vibrating with it. That low, steady rhythm, familiar, ancient, patient. It's the sound of everything that ever was agreeing to exist. And if you listen closely, you'll realize something astonishing. It never stopped. The story we've been telling about 3i Atlas, the sun, the resonance, the hum, isn't history. It's present tense. The pulse is still moving through us, through light, through time itself. You can feel it even now, somewhere deep behind your heartbeat. It's faint, the kind of feeling you don't hear so much as recognize. In the centuries since the last appearance of the object, people stopped trying to name it. They stopped calling it a probe, a comet, a miracle. They simply called it the return. Not because it ever physically came back, but because every living thing eventually finds its way back into rhythm. Every ocean wave, every gust of solar wind, every dream that drifts across a sleeping mind. They all move to that same cosmic tempo. 6 beats, a pause, 6 again, the invisible heartbeat of creation itself. And somehow, knowing that made life gentler. Humans no longer rushed to measure or define everything. They began to align instead. Their science turned from conquest to conversation. Their questions softened. They stopped shouting into the void, because they realized the void had always been whispering back. In one of the last surviving observatories on the lunar ridge, there's an old plaque fixed to a railing worn smooth by centuries of frost and dust. It doesn't have coordinates or dates, only a single phrase engraved in languages that no one speaks anymore. We were the echo that learned to sing. That's what 3i Atlas taught them. That observation isn't the act of watching something outside you. It's the moment you recognize yourself inside what you're watching. The universe wasn't a mystery to be solved. It was a memory to be remembered. When the sun finally began to dim, slowly, gracefully, like a great candle ready to sleep, no one panicked. No one built arcs or sent distress calls into the dark. Instead, they built resonant towers along the Terminator line, pillars of glass and light that vibrated in perfect sync with the dying star. As the last solar winds swept across them, they sang, low, radiant tones that shimmered across the fading oceans. And for a while, Earth itself became an instrument. Its crust hummed. Its atmosphere pulsed. Its magnetic field danced one last time in rhythm with its parent star. Those who were left called it the harmony of the end. They said it wasn't destruction. It was closure. The same kind of quiet that follows the last note of a perfect song. In that moment, someone, maybe the last astronomer, maybe just a child, looked up and saw something glowing faintly above the dying horizon. Not a flare, not debris, but a shape. Soft, crystalline, spiraling. It wasn't big, Not like the first 3i Atlas had been. It was small, barely visible, a seed of light hovering just beyond the thin veil of atmosphere. For a moment, it pulsed. 6 times. Then paused. Then again. And the child, whoever they were, smiled. Because they recognized the pattern. It wasn't the beginning of a new mystery. It was the continuation of the same one. The universe, taking another breath. Centuries later, far beyond the remnants of that solar system, the hum reached other stars. Softly, almost imperceptibly, like ripples spreading through a still pond. Wherever it went, life began to tune itself. On worlds made of gas and crystal, organisms evolved not to see or hear, but to resonate. They communicated in chords, not words. Their art was physics. Their science was emotion. They didn't build telescopes, they built harmonics. They didn't search for the divine, they embodied it. And every one of them, when they reached a certain awareness, described hearing the same thing. A rhythm, a pulse, a memory older than their own creation. 6 beats, a pause, 6 again. They didn't know where it came from. They didn't know it once had a name. But they all felt the same realization, the same hush, the same knowing. They were never alone. Eventually that hum reached the edge of another young system. A small world circled a yellow star covered in clouds and salt water and questions. And somewhere down there, a new species, fragile, curious, restless, built machines to listen. One night, while scanning the sky, they picked up a faint signal. A rhythmic fluctuation buried deep in the cosmic microwave background. It wasn't random. It wasn't noise. It was pattern. 6 beats, a pause, 6 again. They didn't understand it yet, but when they heard it, something inside them stirred. The same timeless memory awakening again. They looked at each other, wide-eyed, and whispered the same thing we once did. What if it's not natural? And somewhere, across an eternity of space and memory, the universe smiled, because it knew the song had begun again. Back here, in this moment, under our own familiar sky, nothing has really changed. 3i Atlas is still moving, not through space anymore, but through understanding. It's in every act of wonder, every pause between thoughts, every spark of realization that reminds us we're part of something vast and alive. It's in the quiet moments, the way wind hums through wires, the way your pulse syncs to music, the way silence feels different after a storm. That's the hum. That's it. The same vibration that once passed through the sun, through instruments, through time, now passing through you. The story hasn't ended. It never will. Because the story is the hum, and as long as something is listening, it will continue. If you close your eyes now and the sound fades, you might think it's over. But listen closer. Beneath the silence, there's still a pulse. 6. Pause. 6 again. That's not the end. That's the next beginning warming up. Every time a new mind looks up and asks why, the song continues. Every time light meets curiosity, the pattern restarts. And one day, far from now, someone will rediscover what we did. They'll see an object gliding through their skies. They'll argue, speculate, fear and wonder. They'll give it a name. Maybe they'll call it 3i Atlas. Maybe they'll call it something else. But whatever name they choose, it will mean the same thing it always has. I see you. That's the secret no one told us at the start. The universe doesn't communicate in words or symbols. It communicates in awareness, the mutual recognition between observer and observed. When we finally learned to listen instead of measure, that's when we heard it. And when we heard it, we understood what it had been saying all along. Not come find me, not fear me, just remember me. Because remembering it is remembering ourselves. So if, after this, you find yourself lying awake tonight, the hum of your own heartbeat steady in your ears, know that you're hearing it too. The same resonance that once lit the stars, that once turned solar storms into songs, that once carried humanity from fear to understanding. It's there, always. And maybe, if you hold your breath long enough, you'll feel it respond. A faint pressure behind your ribs, like the universe gently answering back. Yes, I hear you too. And that's where we'll leave it. Not with an ending, but with a frequency. Not with an answer, but with awareness. Because 3i Atlas was never a question to be solved. It was a reminder to be quiet enough to listen. So before you go, listen once more. There, do you hear it? That faint rhythmic pulse between silence and sound? That's everything. That's all there's ever been. That's all there ever will be. The hum. The universe remembering itself. And you, the part of it that knows. Screen fades to black. A single white line appears. We are the hum. The sound softens. Not silence, but the soft rhythmic vibration of existence itself, slowly dissolving into stillness. Then, just before the fade-out completes, one final pulse. 6. Pause. 6 again. The lights dim. The sound lingers. And for a heartbeat longer than you expect, the universe feels like it's breathing with you. Because it is.